Hello, fellow aviators. Our lesson today will be trying to calculate our takeoff and landing distances. So, okay, let's hop straight to it. Uh, let's skip number one. Okay, we cannot answer number one in this, so we'll just skip straight to number two. Okay, what we have to do first is, since we have our table here, we need to find out what our given is, so we can refer to it on our table. Right now, it's 2,000 pounds, 4,000 feet in pressure altitude, and 10 degrees Celsius of outside air temperature. And we have headwinds of 4 knots. So, headwind 4 knots in a grassy runway. So, what we need to look for is we need to determine the takeoff distances. So, if it does not mention ground roll, we will look at our total to clear 50 feet obstacle value. So, 50 feet obstacle. So, since we have 2,000 pounds, we look at the weight here and look for the value that says 2,000 pounds. 2,000 pounds at pressure altitude of 4,500. Correction, 4,000 feet. So pressure altitude of 4,000 feet. And then we have 10 degrees Celsius of outside air temperature. So this is the value for your outside air temperature. We'll look for 10 degrees Celsius. Next, you will then cross-reference it with the total to clear 50 feet because that's what we're looking for. Total to clear 50 feet obstacle because it does not mention ground roll. So with that in mind, our value is 1,500 feet. Okay, now that we have 1,500 feet, we will take into consideration our headwind. So for our takeoff distances, we can decrease distances by 10% for each 9 knots of headwind. Divide 4 by 9 knots and multiply it by 10%. Since for each 9 knots of headwind, we will subtract the distance by 10%. So let's put that into our calculator. 4 divided by 9 multiplied by 0.1, 0. Correction, 0.04. So after this, we will then multiply it by our distance. So let's multiply 1,500, and our value is 66.66 feet. Okay, so now that we have this value, so what we need to do is subtract 1,500 feet by 66.66 feet, and our value will be 1,500 by 66.66, 1,433.30. Since it's continuing, let's just 3 feet, because if the number kept going on, it will still be 3, not 4. After this, we need to remember that we have grass runway. For a grass runway, increase distances by 50% of the ground roll figure. Okay, so now let's use our ground roll figure. Let's go back. So for 10% at 10 degrees at ground roll figure, 4,000 pressure altitude, our value is 815. So that's our value, 815 feet. Let's go over here, 815 feet. Now, we need to multiply this by 15%. Oh, my bad. 15%. And then with this, once we get the answer, we need to add it to our distance. So 815 multiplied by 0.15 is 122.25 feet. After that, we'll add it to our number, our distance. Right now, it should be 1,433.33 feet. And then that answer would be 1,555.58 feet. So with that in mind, this is our final answer. Moving on, next we have number 3. We need to determine the distance to clear 50 feet obstacle, right? So It's another 50 feet obstacle. For the given conditions, let's write down our conditions, which is 2,200 pounds, a pressure altitude of 3,000 feet, uh, outside air temperature of 40 degrees Celsius, and a tailwind of 3 knots. Okay, 3,000 feet, 2,130. So that is our value, 2,130 feet. And next, we have 3 knots of tailwind. So let's go and read what we have for our tailwind. So, okay, here. For operations with tailwind up to 10 knots, increase distance by 10% for each 2 knots. Since we have 3 knots of tailwind, that will be 3 over 2 multiplied by 10%. So, let's put that in our calculator. 3 divided by 2 equals, then multiply it by 0.1. So that is 0.15. Then we multiply it with 2,130, because we will then add on 319.5. So that our distance is now 344.9. Oh, correction. 3449.5 feet. That's the answer. This is the answer. This is the final answer for number 3. We weren't given much to deal with, so okay, let's do a refresher, right? 2,200 pounds, 3,000 feet pressure altitude, and 40 degrees Celsius outside air temperature. We go to our table and look for our value, and our value is 2,130. Total to clear 50 feet obstacle. The next, we will then add our tailwind, because for each tailwind, our distances increase. So in order to get that, we have 3 knots over 2 multiplied by 10% correction. We have 0.15. We multiply it by 2,130 feet, and then we increase our distance. So 2,130 plus 600, correction, 319.5. So this is what our answer is. Okay, moving on. We will now refer to our landing distance table. So we have multiple tables here, but I'll teach you how. Determine the approximate landing ground roll distance. Okay, so landing ground roll distance, and we have our values here. So pressure altitude of 8,000 feet with a tailwind of 8 knots and an outside air temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. So let's look for the value of 8,000 pressure altitude. Here we are. Okay, so this is 8,000, right? So this is our pressure altitude. And then we have 20 degrees of outside air temperature. So we will then cross-reference it. Oh, correction. So we're looking for our ground roll, remember? So we're looking for our ground roll. It will be 740. Okay, so our value is 740 feet. And then next, after this, we will then take into consideration our tailwind. Okay, so for tailwinds up to 10 knots, increase distances by 10% for each 2 knots. This is for landing distance, okay? So since we have 8 knots, we will divide it by 2, multiply it by 10%. That will be our value, 8, then divided by 2, multiply by 0.1. That will be 0.4. We then multiply it with this value, and 740. We then add it to the value. So since we get the 0.4, we multiply it by 740. We will then, since it increases with tailwind, so that will be 740 plus 296. Then we get 1,000 36 feet. And this will be our final answer. Okay, next up, we have number 5. Let's write down, okay, determine the total distance required to land over 50-foot obstacle, pressure altitude of 4,500 feet, headwind of 10 knots, and outside air temperature of 0 degrees. So again, wait, hold on, this is ground roll. And this is 50-foot obstacle. So let's write down our values. We have 4,500 feet of pressure altitude, a headwind of 10 knots, and outside air temperature of 0 degrees. Now let's look for it in our table. Okay, since we do not have pressure altitude of 4,500 feet, we will now look for it, okay? So let me teach you how to look for it. Let us write down 4,000 and 5,000 with 4,500 in between. Then, let's look at the total to clear 50 feet obstacle values and write those down as well. So for 4,000, we have 1,365, and for 5,000, we have 1,400. So in order to figure out how much our 4,500 pressure altitude is, we will take the difference between these two, which is 500 feet. So the difference of 4,000 and 4,500 is 500. Then the difference of 4,000 and 5,000 is 1,000. So that's 500 over 1,000. And then we multiply it by the difference between these two, which is 1,400 minus 1,365 is 35. Okay, so now we get our value for this when you put it into the calculator is 17.5. So 17.5. After we get that value, we add it to 1,365. Once you've added it, that is our 4,500 pressure altitude value. 1,382.5. So now that we have a value for 4,500, we can now answer for 10 knots of headwind. So let's go read here. Decrease distances by 10% for each 9 knots of headwind. Since we have 10 knots, let me write down our value for first, 1,382.5. So now that we have 10 knots, we need to divide that by 9, multiply it by 10%. This is our formula, so I'll put that into the calculator. 10 divided by 9 equals, multiply it by 0.1. It is 0.11. So now that we have our value, we multiply it to we multiply it to our distance, 1,382.5. That is the next. Since it is headwind, we will subtract it to our distance. So we'll subtract from 1,382.5, 153.61. 1,228.89 feet. So for this number, this is our final answer. Okay, this is actually my second take on number 6 because it's pretty difficult to explain. It is very complicated. So let's go again. Let's get our pressure altitude of 7,500 feet. Headwind of 2 knots and 72 degrees Fahrenheit in a grass runway. Okay, let's look for a value for 7,500 knots, right? 7,500. Okay, so let's look for a value of 7,500 feet. It's given here. 7,500 feet. Our ground roll distance, let's just looking for ground roll distance, is 520. So let's put 520 here. Next, we have 72 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Oh, over here at 7,500 feet and 32 degrees Fahrenheit, we will have a formula which is 72 degrees Fahrenheit minus 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That is equal to 40. And let's go read what it says over here. Increase the distance for, okay, number 2, increase the distance by 10% for each 60-degree Fahrenheit temperature increase above standard. So since we have 40 degrees Fahrenheit, we will divide that by 60 degrees Fahrenheit and multiply it by 10%. So our value here is, okay, 40 divided by 60 multiplied by 0.1 is 0.06. So we will use this value to multiply it to our distances. We multiply 520 by 0.06 and we get the value of, let's write it over here, 34.66. Next, we need to add 34.66 to 520. So 520. And our value is 554.66 feet. Okay, we're not done yet. After that, we need to take into consideration our headwind. So let's read it here. Number 1, decrease the distances shown by 10% for each 4 knots of headwind. So we're going to have a formula here. That would be 2 because our headwind is 2 over 4 multiplied by 10 degrees, 10% for each 4 knots of headwind. So 2 divided by 4 multiplied by 0.1 is 0.05. So this is the value that will multiply to our distance that we have right now. So let's multiply this value, 554.66. That is 27.73. So since it is headwind, we will subtract it to this number. So 27.73. Okay. 554.66 minus 27.73. Our value is 526.93 feet. Okay. We're not done yet. Okay. So we have grass runway, right? So let's read here number 3. For operations on a dry grass runway, increase distances hold on. Increase distances by 20% of the total to clear 50 feet obstacle figure. So now we're going to need the total to clear 50 feet obstacle figure. Let's just get rid of this up. We need total to clear 50 feet obstacle, right? So we'll use the same formula right here, but we'll put it to 1,255 since that is our value for total to clear 50 feet. So 1255 multiplied by 0.06. That will be, let's write it down over here, 83.66. Next, we will add it to our 1255 value. So 1255, that is 1338.66. I'll just put this in the calculator just in case because I'm not very confident in my math. Okay, so I was right. Okay, 1338.66. That is our value, right? Now we need to get 20% of that. Let's get 20% of 1388.66, multiply it by 0.2. So the value is 267.73. Since it is a grass runway, we will add this value to 526.93 feet to the distance that we have right now. So that will be 526.93 plus, okay, 267.73. Let's put that here into our calculator. 526.93 equals 794.66 feet. Now, despite all that, that was pretty fun. Okay, so that is how, okay. So that was a very long process. That's a very tedious process to get. But now This is the final answer. This is a very complicated process, pero this is the final answer right here. 794.66 feet. Now, I hope you got all that uh, because we do have a quiz tomorrow for my classmates. And yeah, this is how we determine our final number 6.